TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Were you a wrestling fan growing up?
No, because when I grew up, we came up real poor. So as a kid, I spent most of my time working on the farm, and my mother had 9 kids. There was no father around, so us kids, we had to get out and help support the family. So we didn't have time for television or video games or any of that nature. All of us, we had to get out and help the family make it.
Where were you raised at?
I was raised in Clifton Forge, Virginia.
Okay.
That's up in what's called the Appalachians Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountain, Appalachian Alligator Mountain. I'm what you may call a hillbilly.
Huh. Now, I want to ask you is how you came across professional wrestling. How did you get introduced?
There was I just got a book called Too Much Too Soon, and I explained the first wrestler that I ever met was Black Jack Mulligan. And I was working at the YMCA, and I met Black Jack Mulligan, Sandy, and George Scott. They used to do shows at the Starland Arena in Roanoke, Virginia. And I was living in Roanoke at the time. So when they came down, my friend, Alfonso Johnson, he recognized who they were because, he was a wrestling fan. So Alfonso introduced me to Mulligan and to Sandy and George Scott and Klondike Bill and Johnny Weaver and guys that used to come into the gym and work out during that time. And that's how I got introduced. But I was an amateur wrestler. I was a 4-year state champion, and I was a Greco-Roman champion. So I did a lot of weightlifting and powerlifting and amateur wrestling before I turned pro.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to talk about your bodybuilding and your arm wrestling and powerlifting.
Yeah, when I started off, believe it or not, what they call a weightlifter. And what a weightlifter does is they lift the weights from the ground over the head, like what you see in the Olympic. That's why they call it Olympic weightlifting. And then powerlifting is the bench press, where you lay flat on your back and push the weight up. The squat, where you put the weight behind your neck and sit down and stand up with it. And of course, the deadlift, where you just pull a massive amount of weight up from the ground. And I was involved in arm wrestling, powerlifting, and weightlifting a great deal when I was a kid.
So basically, you got introduced to George and Sandy Scott, and they asked you if you wanted to get into the business? Right.
When they hear about my amateur background, and they thought it would be great to bring me into pro wrestling due to the fact that I started wrestling amateur wrestling when I was in the 7th grade. So I wrestled from the 7th grade all the way up as a JV, and then when I hit the 10th grade at that time, I joined the varsity team.
Okay. Who actually trained you in professional wrestling?
To be honest with you, a guy named Larry Sharp, who later opened up the Monster Factory, was involved in my training. Ole and Gene Anderson was involved in my training. And back in them days, they didn't have wrestling school. So what they did when you broke into business, the whole territory would be involved in helping you. Mr. Fuji, Kim Patero, and guys would come down each morning and work out with you. But there was no wrestling school to go to at that particular time. And wrestling was like a family. So they just didn't let anybody in the business at that time. They were very protective of the business. So you had to pay your dues to be trained. You had to pay your dues to make money or to have something to say, in the dressing room.
Did any of the guys try to stretch you early on?
Oh, yeah, that was part of it because the difference between wrestling today and wrestling then is that when you broke into business, you definitely had to know how to protect yourself because we was around the fans 24/7. We didn't have barricades to keep us away from the fans, and we didn't slip out to our cars after the show was all over. When you walk out in the parking lot, you park where the fans park. So you may walk out of your car in a day and there's 20, 30 people surrounding your car. So, if you didn't have the respect of the fan and the respect of the boys, then you got your butt whooped, And also in the ring too, if a guy didn't respect you, no matter if the match was determined to be win, lose, or draw, if you couldn't protect yourself in that ring, your opponent would beat you from one end of that match to the other.
Who smartened you up to the business when you first broke in? Who do you consider your mentor?
I would say that George Scott.
George Scott?
George Scott, he was like a father to me. I was raised up without a father, so it was very enlightening to have George Scott around because I talk a lot about him in my book, Too Much Too Soon, and he was the guy that influenced me the most and trained me, and And I was the first wrestler to be paid to be trained. They paid me $150 a week to break into the business.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
What was the training like, and did you ever want to quit?
The training back in my town was the first thing you do, you get up in the morning and you work out with the weights for about 2 hours. Then after that, you go to the stadium and you run up and down the stadium steps until you go all the way around. Then you would do 300 push-ups, 300 jumping jacks, and 300 squats. And then after you do that, they put you on the mat with other people that want to be in the business. And when your body feel like a rubber band, then the shooters would get in there and stretch you. And then they would wait till the next day to see who show up. So, the training session was brutal back in them days. But like I said, it was a business. They want to make sure that you was tough enough to, to handle the role, the stress of the role, tough enough to handle yourself in a competition. If you should go into the local bar or something, they want to make sure that the local tough guy or the bar bouncer is not the person that whoop your butt. Because if they put you over on TV and then you go into a bar later on that night and get whooped, that was a bad reflection on the business at the time. And they didn't want that to happen. So, whoever they put in the ring, they want to make sure this person was tough enough to continue in the business, because they didn't want to waste the time with you.
Right, especially in the Bill Watts territory.
Exactly. Like in Bill Watts, if you got in a fight in the dressing room and the guys break it up, the guys that broke up the fight would get fired. And what Bill Watts used to do, he used to let you fight it out, but once that fight is over, he didn't want to hear about it no more.
Right. Did you ever want to quit during your training, or did you...
Oh, yeah, many times. And Gene Anderson was the guy that said, no, he said, you go quit and do what? Go back to what? So I thought about it, and I just kept drilling away at it.
Do you remember your very first match with Bob Rugers against Art Nelson and Blue Scorpion?
Yep. Well, what happened was, a lot of people don't realize this, but even when you was in the ring, they didn't smart you up to the business. So Bob Rugers get in the ring, and the guy's taking all kind of bumps for him. He's throwing them all over the place. And at that time, I was maybe about 235, 240, bench pressing about 480, 500 pounds. So I figured I was a pretty stout kid. I was about 20 years old. And I got in the ring, and I couldn't do what Bob did. I had to shoot for what I get because they hadn't smartened me up yet. So finally, what I did, I got Art Nelson in the headlock. And I squeezed, and I squeezed, and I squeezed, and I squeezed till he started turning purple in the face. When I got back to the dressing room, I went to thank him for the match. And I remember him telling George Scott, he said, you're going to smart that damn nigger up right now, or the next time we get in the ring with him, I'm going to shoot him. So then George Scott came to me and said, Tony, tomorrow we're going to teach you how to work. And so the boys were so protective of the business that when I said, work? What do you mean work? He said, well, we're going to teach you how to work. So I went and asked Sandy Scott, his brother, I said, hey, tomorrow I'm going to learn to work. He said, I thought you want to be a wrestler. He said, what do you mean work? You're going to work for McDonald's? You're going to be a construction worker? What type of work? They were just that protective. Even though I knew what the word work mean, they still I was in a position where they could trust me yet. So really my first couple of matches was all shoots. Because you was in the ring, that didn't mean you were smart. Right. And they would gradually smart you up as they figured out that you were not going to quit the business or you were not going to do something to expose the business. So a lot of your matches were, at the beginning for most of guys' career, was a shoot.
Did you experience a lot of racism in wrestling early on? Not
racism, more sexism than racism.
Right.
Because one thing about most of the most racist guys that I met in the business was black guys. They always had this thing about slavery, and the only thing that could have hurt me with the white wrestlers was white girls. That was one of the first rules that I started. George Scott put me in office. He said, Tony, there's 3 things you got to remember if you want to make money in this business. Keep your mouth shut, do as you're told, and stay away from white women. He said that the third one is the most important one. And it was very, very important that you didn't get in any type of relationship with any other woman at that particular time, because you got to realize America didn't desegregate until 1973. Up until 1972, 73, we was a separate nation. So I come along 3 years after segregation. So it was a whole new different mindset about that type of activity going on. And I kept my promise. I stayed away from it until later on in my life when I met my wife.